Have you ever wondered how the assassination of a single man could trigger a global conflict? Welcome to the world of World War I. In the heart of the Balkans, on a summer day in 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, fell victim to an assassin's bullet. This single event, tragic as it was, turned out to be the spark that ignited the powder keg of tensions simmering in Europe. Archduke Ferdinand's death was not just a personal loss, but also a political earthquake. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, demanded justice from Serbia, where the assassin Gavrilo Princip hailed from. Serbia, a small but fiercely independent nation, had its own powerful friends, including Russia, which was eager to assert its influence in the Balkans. As the diplomatic crisis deepened, the intricate web of alliances that had been woven across the continent began to tighten. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, drawing Russia into the conflict to protect its ally. Germany, bound by its own alliance with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia, and so the dominoes began to fall. France, Russia's ally, found itself at war with Germany. When German troops marched through neutral Belgium to attack France, Britain, pledged to protect Belgian neutrality, declared war on Germany. Suddenly, a local conflict had escalated into a full-blown global war. The world in 1914 was a place of empires and alliances, ambitions and fears. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand didn't cause World War I on its own. It was the spark that lit the fuse of a bomb that had been years in the making, a bomb made of national pride, imperial ambition, economic competition, and a tangled network of alliances and treaties. This was a world where the death of one man in a far-off corner of Europe could set off a chain reaction that would plunge the entire globe into war. And so, the stage was set for one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. In the face of such turmoil, nations braced themselves for the unforeseen journey ahead. As the early stages of the war unfolded, Europe was caught in a web of strategic maneuvers and counter-moves. One such maneuver was Germany's Schlieffen Plan, a bold and ambitious strategy that aimed to swiftly knock out France before turning east to confront Russia. It hinged on speed and surprise, but as it turned out, war is rarely that predictable. The Battle of the Marne in September 1914 was a pivotal moment. The German advance was halted and pushed back by a determined counter-offensive from the French and British forces. What was supposed to be a swift victory turned into a protracted stalemate. The war of rapid maneuvers gave way to a war of attrition, a grinding battle where every yard gained was paid for in blood and sweat. This is where the grim reality of trench warfare began to take shape. The Western Front, stretching from the Swiss border to the North Sea, became a network of trenches, barbed wire, and artillery. Both sides dug in, literally. Soldiers lived, fought, and often died in these muddy, rat-infested trenches. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The line rarely moved more than a few miles in either direction. In this deadly stalemate, new weapons like machine guns, poison gas, and tanks made their debut on the battlefield, each bringing new horrors. Yet despite the massive loss of life, neither side could claim a decisive victory. The war had become a grinding machine, consuming men and resources at an alarming rate. The Western Front, once a symbol of swift victory, had turned into a grim testament to the horrors of modern warfare. The Great War, as it was known then, had evolved into a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. Yet this was just the beginning. The war was far from over, and as we'll see in the next scene, significant twists and turns were yet to come. The Western Front had turned into a grim testament to the horrors of modern warfare. As the war raged on, the balance of power began to shift. In the middle years of the Great War, a series of pivotal events began to alter the trajectory of the conflict. One of these was the entry of the United States into the war in April of 1917. With fresh troops and resources, the United States bolstered the Allies and tipped the balance in their favor. The impact of the United States' entry was significant. offering not just military might, but a psychological boost to the beleaguered allies. Meanwhile, in the east, the Russian Revolution was unfolding. The Bolsheviks seized power in October of 1917, leading to Russia's withdrawal from the war. This event freed up Germany and the Central Powers to focus their efforts on the Western Front, a shift that had profound implications for the course of the war. However, despite this advantage, Germany's ambitious spring offensive in 1918 fell short of its goals. Launched in March, the offensive aimed to split the Allies and force a decisive victory before the full force of the United States could be brought to bear. The Germans made significant early gains, pushing the Allies back across a wide front. But the offensive faltered as German troops outran their supply lines and the Allies mounted a tenacious defense. By July, the offensive had ground to a halt, leaving the Germans exhausted and unable to replace their losses. The failure of the spring offensive marked a turning point in the Great War. The Allies, rejuvenated by American reinforcements and buoyed by the failure of the German offensive, began to push back. The momentum of the war had shifted decisively. The tide of war had turned, setting the stage for the final act of this global tragedy. The stage was set for a series of Allied offensives that would ultimately bring an end to the war. But the cost, as we'll see, would be high, and the consequences far-reaching. 1918 marked the beginning of the end for the Central Powers. As the year dawned, the tide of the Great War had begun to turn. The Central Powers, exhausted and depleted, were stretched to their breaking points. In the trenches, the morale of the soldiers was at an all-time low, and on the home front, civil unrest was brewing. In November of that year, an armistice was signed, a suspension of hostilities that essentially marked the end of the war. But the story doesn't end there. The peace was to be formalized in the Treaty of Versailles, a document that would shape the world in ways no one could have predicted. The treaty, signed in June of 1919, was more than just a peace agreement. It was transformative, altering the global political landscape in unprecedented ways. Empires crumbled, new nations emerged, and national borders were redrawn, often with little regard for the ethnic and cultural realities on the ground. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman empires, once mighty and expansive, were no more. In their place, new countries were birthed. Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia were among the nations that emerged from the ashes of these fallen empires. Germany, the perceived instigator of the conflict, was dealt a harsh hand. The treaty held Germany responsible for the war and imposed heavy reparations. These conditions sowed the seeds of resentment and discontent, which would later bear fruit in the form of another devastating global conflict, World War II. The war had ended, but its impact was far-reaching. It had claimed the lives of millions and left countless others scarred, both physically and mentally. It had brought about technological advancements, forever changing the nature of warfare. It had also given rise to new political ideologies and movements, setting the stage for the tumultuous decades that would follow. The guns had fallen silent, but the echoes of the Great War would resonate for decades to come. World War I was more than just a war, it was a catalyst for immense change. It reshaped the political, economic, and social landscapes of the world, leaving a legacy that continues to influence us today. One of the most significant outcomes was the rise of the United States as a global power. After maintaining a policy of isolationism, the United States was thrust onto the world stage with its entry into the war in 1917. The end of the war saw the United States emerge as one of the world's leading economies, its industrial strength and financial resources playing a vital role in the post-war world order. On the other side of the globe, the war paved the way for the establishment of the Soviet Union. The chaos and devastation of the war provided fertile ground for the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. The subsequent establishment of the first communist state in 1917 drastically altered the geopolitical landscape, setting the stage for the ideological conflicts of the 20th century. In an attempt to prevent another catastrophic conflict, the League of Nations was created. Although it ultimately failed to prevent World War II, the League set a precedent for international cooperation and conflict resolution. It laid the groundwork for the United Nations, which continues to play a crucial role in international relations to this day. Finally, World War I brought about profound social changes. Women's roles were transformed as they took on jobs traditionally held by men, leading to a push for gender equality. The war also sparked a wave of anti-colonial movements as people in colonized nations started to demand their right to self-determination. In conclusion, the effects of World War I were far-reaching and long-lasting. It was a war that changed the world, a war whose shadows still loom over us today.